Well, good afternoon from a cold, snowy northeastern United States. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays. And as listeners know, I invite people on my show who inspire me. And needless to say, I just have to say the name Denise Graves, and you get it: inspiration personified, talent, beauty, energy, intelligence, generosity. It's all there in one person. And she is joining me from her home somewhat south of here. Is it snowing there too?
It is snowing there here and it's beautiful.
Good. Welcome, Denise, and thank you. I know that you just completed teaching a master class for the Opera Theater of St. Louis. And the way we live now is that you're near Washington, D.C., and you were teaching, quote, in St. Louis, and I'm joining you in New York. Uh, what's the experience like to teach when your students are elsewhere?
Right, it isn't ideal, but actually, in some ways, I can concentrate more. One of the things I do is sort of an amalgamation of Zoom and FaceTime. Sometimes I find that the quality of the sound is better, the audio is better on FaceTime, so I'll have them FaceTime me to listen to the sound, and then I can see their bodies on Zoom. But it's intense. It's intense because you are devoted and give that person 100%, for that hour's time.
Can you fairly evaluate sound and volume and resonance through this technology, or do you really just have to give that a pass?
Right. So there's a fair amount of distortion that can be, for sure, and the quality varies depending on the voice that's on the other side and what their setup is. But it is not ideal, but it's what we've got, and we've been able to work that way beautifully. I've had some fantastic lessons through Zoom, and again, nothing replaces being there, of course. Um, but it's the next best thing. This has been an incredible period right now. We've had to learn very differently, and we've all had to become far more tech savvy than we thought we had to be, right? And I think that this is good. I don't think that this is actually going to go anywhere. I think Zoom is going to be there. It's going to be a part of our lives. I think we're going to see now being folded into the curriculums of conservatories, audio visual and all sorts of technical courses now. So I think this is where we are. We're doing our auditions this week at Peabody, video submissions, and we're seeing that more and more. And so in some ways it's been very cost effective. It's been very convenient in other ways. But of course, I miss being there and touching them and seeing what their bodies are doing. But I've surprised myself. I have fallen in love, with a lot of the students over Zoom. So it can still happen. There's still a connection.
I just sort of a question that I had not planned to ask you, but just this morning on an opera group in Facebook, there's been a bit of a discussion, debate really, about whether young singers need to, should, or should not readjust their thinking about how they dress when they come to auditions. When I began to work in opera, I began first in the States and then in Italy. And I'm not saying that young artists had to dress up, so to speak. We wanted them to be comfortable, but in Italy, at least, there was a certain kind of comfortable but attractive clothing that could be worn everywhere. I'm of the opinion that one, especially because it's expensive trying to be a young singer, that they shouldn't have to spend extra money on those things. But maybe part of the education is about self presentation and knowing what physically is comfortable and how to present. I know that many people disagree with me and think you can show up in gym clothes or whatever, and it's about the voice and the acting and the presentation. One person said, and she may have a point, that if the auditioning singer is dressed more casually, you can ask him or her to move about more as an actor and do physical things that might be called for in a role. Where do you stand on that?
I come from the old school, I will say that. I studied with Helen Hodem when I was a student at Oberlin College Conservatory. And they used to laugh at us in the conservatory. We called it the con. They used to laugh. They could tell when we had a voice lesson because the girls would have on their lipstick and have on their dresses and their heels and that sort of thing. And she believed that that's what we were there doing, right? We're there studying to become, a vocal artist, right? A performer. And I think that everybody knows that if you walk down the street in a nice outfit, you behave differently. And not only that, the response that you get is different. That's really different from if you're walking out of the house now, like my kids do, like in their pajamas and slides and stuff like that. You can always tell that people carry themselves differently. So I agree with that. I think it's a good idea. I don't require it from my students, but I don't let them show up in any old kind of thing because I think this is what you want to do. You are the instrument. When you put yourself together, you yourself carry yourself differently that day. This is an important moment. It's all about your voice lessons. This is what you're here training to do, right? So I believe that you should take some care in how you show up. And so I can understand the argument about being comfortable, but you can be comfortable. I mean, you don't have to wear a ball gown, right? But you can carry yourself in such a way. You can wear a nice dress or the slacks or whatever it is that you want to do, but you take some time to prepare yourself and for how you present yourself. Not only that, that when particularly if you're studying in conservatory or whatever, you're already working, you're already networking, you're already getting a reputation for yourself. If people can tell that you're someone who cares about, I'm not saying that you don't care if you don't dress up, but you care more if you take the time to put together what it is that you want and how you want to show up in the world. I think you already get a reputation for yourself. I think people take you, they treat you differently. I tell my kids all the time, my children, that when we're traveling, this was obviously BC, right before COVID. If you're traveling somewhere, put yourself together. Put yourself together nicely because you never know what's going to happen. And people respond very differently from a person who is, cared about what it was that how they presented themselves, as opposed to a person who's got on a ball cap and t-shirt that's ripped in, you're going to get a very different response from the world. So carry yourself with some elegance, with, so I support that idea.
When I was a student,
I think that when I think that, excuse me, I actually think you sing better if you put yourself together well. I think if you take the time and, put yourself in a nice outfit that you feel good and you walk differently, just like everybody does. You walk out of the house in a smart suit or a nice outfit, you carry yourself differently and you present yourself differently to the world, and the world responds to you in a different way. That's really, really different than if you just sort of like slouching around. And I think you sing better when you put yourself together, because when you feel better, the self-esteem goes up, right?
Does it change the posture?
Absolutely, 100%. Changes the posture, changes everything. My teacher, Ms. Odom, used to say, she was talking about one student, she said, I could tell she wasn't going to have a good voice lesson when she came through the door because she wasn't wearing any lipstick. Well, okay, so that doesn't really mean anything, but that was what she thought, that how that person felt about themselves, right? I think it changes everything about you, the way you walk, the way you handle yourself. It changes your posture, it changes the way you feel about yourself. I think it makes a huge, huge difference, and I've always sung better when I felt that I presented myself well, or if I had a nice, beautiful dress that I was, know that the audience was, looking forward to seeing or something like that. Yes, absolutely.
When I was 20, I was a student in the autumn of that year in Paris, and I was poor as a proverbial church mouse. I lived in a garret on the 7th floor with broken furniture. It really was La Boheme. It was chilly. But I learned by watching how to dress in such a way and how to walk in such a way. I got myself a nice Parisian blazer that was all purpose. I got scarves before everybody wore scarves, accessorized. I had a cap. I had shirts that I would wash in my little sink and hang them up.
That's right.
And every time I stepped out of that hovel of a building in Paris and began to walk, it changed. And I could enter any cafe, any bar, any art gallery, because let's not pretend when you're 20 and you want a meal, you go to an art opening. And so I would go to art galleries, but I would be well presented and I worked on my French. Clothing can open doors.
You better believe it, 100%. I'm a believer.
And with that said, my dear, I put this shirt on for you today.
Yeah, I feel warm already looking at that. I just feel
well, there's a reason. I've not worn this shirt for many months for obvious reasons, but this design on this shirt are palmetto trees. And the palmetto tree is the tree of South Carolina on the state flag, which leads me to the last time I saw you on the stage was in Porgy and Bess at the Metropolitan Opera, which I saw 3 times. And it was a wonderful production with really an all-star cast. They were all great. And you played Mariah. And I worked on the previous Met production, and Barbara Conrad played Mariah, and that's how I got to know her.
I saw her 100 times.
We had great fun, and she made a lot of the role. And I intentionally did not bring my Barbara Conrad performance to yours. I just wanted to see your Mariah. And they could not have been more different, and they were equally wonderful.
Thank you.
Yours was tougher. She knew what was going on. She was no nonsense. She, in my view, she saw what was happening to the other women in the community, and she did not want that to happen to her. Mm-hmm. And sometimes Mariah is the practical moral force, whereas Serena is the religious moral force. There are other moral forces in the community, each of whom respond to the story of Bess and the story of Porgy. What I kind of loved among many things in this production was that it didn't recreate other wonderful productions of Porgy and Bess I had seen, but really went fresh at it. And I would love to know about the rehearsal process that led to this, to me, very distinct production. I'm just going to add one thing, that Frederick Ballantyne, who played Sport in Life, was the most louche, unlikable Sport in Life, but that worked beautifully. Normally, he has a certain kind of roguish charm. This one was really, pardon the word, a bastard. It was terrible. Yeah. But that made your response to him much stronger.
Right.
Tell me about the rehearsal and the performance.
So I'm happy that you mentioned Barbara Conrad, because I saw her do it so many times and I loved her and I thought she was magnificent. I will say, however, that, you know, it was my first time really with this opera, because there's really nothing in it for the mezzo-soprano. And I always thought that Mariah was a role that, you know, you sang at the real sunset, you know. And so when my agency came to me, I said, what? Wait, what? Already? They want me to play that already? I'm like 10 years away from Mariah, you know, already? And I came into this group of people who had done that production. I think they did it in London, or they've done it
English National Opera.
Exactly. And so the relationships were already formed. They had all these private jokes and stuff like that. And I knew what I didn't want her to be. And if you think about the fact that here's this woman, you know, this is back in the 40s, 30s, 40s, who has her own business, right? She's an entrepreneur. She has to have some savvy and some wherewithal at that time to create this. And somebody said to me, it's just like she's the mayor of the town of the, you know, of Catfish Row. And so I know that I was thinking of her as sort of being this, not so much the moral compass, because she's salty. You know, some of the things she said, they said that I hold the world, they said that I hold the record at the Metropolitan Opera for saying the word slut the most, because
And you do have a lot of competition, I can tell you that.
That's true. But she is a salty girl, who doesn't take any stuff. I think feels tremendously protective of the community. She probably raised all those people there, you know, all the young people, and knew the parents, and you know, babysat them and took care of them as they were growing up. And there's a certain protectiveness. And then when Sport and Life comes into the community, it's like, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly what this means. The same thing with Bess. Like you're going to have to take that someplace else. You know, we've worked hard to keep this sort of insulated, you know, community, and to keep it whole, and to keep it, you know, nourished, and keep it good. And so I was very careful that I didn't want to play her in a stereotypic kind of way. I wanted her to be gritty, so I'm glad that that came across. But I also think it's written. I also think it's there. I wanted her to be gritty, so that there's a lot that we see with her. You know, she has this incredible relationship with Porgy. He trusts her. And then there are really some tender moments. You know, there's some really sassy moments that she has with other people, with Sport and Life, with Bess. And then there are some real tender moments that you see with her, with, you know, Serena and Jake and the fisherman, and with Porgy. And so for me, it gave her a greater range, you know, to play with, if I came at it with a little bit more of an edge to it.
And there's a question I've always had about the character, and I asked Barbara, and I'll tell you after Barbara's response. And I, believe it or not, knew Pearl Bailey, and I asked Pearl Bailey the same question. So I'll tell you Pearl Bailey's response after too.
Wow.
But my question for you about Mariah is, does she have a man somewhere and we don't see him?
Yes.
Did you envision that man, or did you see him as one of the men on the stage?
Well, we saw, you know, the way we did it, we flirted a little bit with the Crab Man.
Yes.
I don't remember that. There was a nice flirt with the Crab Man. I think she's got something going on. I think she's got, you know, so I would say that maybe she doesn't have a steady guy, but I think that I see her as having an occasional part-time lover.
And the reason I ask that is I see a connection and a recognition between Mariah and Bess. The difference being that Mariah knows men and appreciates men, but also is not victimized by men. And therefore, when she interacts with Bess, depending how it's played, it's either pity or contempt or recognition. It's any number of those things. But I saw you do it with Angel Blue, but also with Elizabeth Llewellyn.
Yeah.
And they were such different interactions.
So incredibly different.
And that was amazing to me, that in the same cast, same production, Elizabeth Llewellyn is a British Black woman. She came to the role in London. She rehearsed at London. She sings a lot of Verdi. I know her, and I admire her greatly, but her take on the role was so different from Angel Blue's. And so did you, maybe you didn't analyze it at the moment, but experience Angel Blue differently from Elizabeth Llewellyn as Mariah, I mean?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Just like for anyone, we had Kevin Short a couple of times for Porgy. Very, very different from Eric. And we had sort of a revolving door for a while on the Serenas. You know, we had LaTonya, but we had Karen too.
Karen Slack, yep.
Yeah, we had lots of different women. What was the wonderful woman's name? Oh gosh, she was so wonderful. Sort of slight, petite woman with beautiful voice. Brandy Sutton.
Brandy Sutton.
Oh.
Yeah.
Beautiful. She was beautiful, beautiful as
She is Clara.
oh, she was beautiful.
I went to a lot of those.
Oh,
So all the casts.
yeah, but we had Gilded, we had lots of different people, you know,
Yeah.
coming in and out. But to answer your question, well, first of all, just the stature of the women. Angel's a tall woman.
Mm-hmm.
So she has this already command on the stage because she's a very statuesque woman. That's first thing. So she comes in with a lot of, you know, command and bravura already. I found Elizabeth to be more wounded and more sympathetic. I felt much more compassion, I would say. I mean, I feel a lot of compassion towards Bess. She really breaks my heart. I would wish I could change this opera. I wish I could change this one in Butterfly, right? Um, I feel so badly for her, you know, because here she was on this path and was all looking a certain way, and she turned this incredible corner, and she's just been so scared the whole time, and she just was completely dependent on him and just fell apart when it looked like it. And I feel so badly for Bess, because I do feel like she's a victim of men. But I think with Angel, I sort of, maybe in the combative scenes, I was a little bit more, I think I was stronger with Angel than I was with Elizabeth, because I feel, well, first of all, Denise, the woman, I feel the certain amount of compassion for her. We didn't rehearse a lot, right? So there wasn't an opportunity really to build those relationships. And she was just sort of thrown in there, you know, all of a sudden she had this performance, and you know, she kind of
Elizabeth
didn't know what was going on, who was around her. So there was a protective nature about our relationship that, oh, go over here, no, wait a minute, look out, you know. So it was sort of taking care of her a little bit on the stage. And also, to me, she looks a little bit frightened. I don't know this, but she has these big eyes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And she looks to me a little bit like shell-shocked a little bit. And so I feel like I want to take care of her a little bit with Angel, because she's so tall and so statuesque. I felt like she's totally fine on her own. And I feel like the scenes in which we, you know, where there was some dissonance, that was really happening. I think I felt so badly for Elizabeth that I wasn't as strong in those moments, because I was taking care of her on the stage as an artist. So, but I found them to be incredibly different. I mean, just like night and day.
Elizabeth told me that her conception of Bess is that Bess is a woman who is just naturally more at home with men, not necessarily sexually, romantically, but there are women who just get along better with men than they do with other women.
Really?
In terms of interaction, what they talk about. And her view of the role was that. I want to talk to you also about your knife skills in Porgy and Bess. You filleted those fish so perfectly. You handled the crabs, you handled all the food issues there. The strawberries, that Leah Hawkins singing that gorgeous, gorgeous rendition. It was like one of the songs of the Auvergne by Canteloup. But there's a lot of stage business for Mariah. And a lot of it in this case, because you ran a cafe, a trattoria, whatever you want to call it, you had to work with knives and fish and all kinds of things. And you made your cutting of the fish an extension of your character and your contempt, your deliberateness, your skill, but also your contempt for sport and life. And you made so much of that, not too much, but I mean, you extended your physicalization of the character well beyond the words and the music. Well, where did you get your knife skills from? You a good cook?
Well, I enjoy cooking. I certainly do enjoy cooking. I love being in the kitchen, and I think it's like singing. I think it's like singing. You know, you add a little bit of this. It's like putting together an aria or something. You know, and the right amount of seasoning and this, and waiting here and allowing space there and giving. You know, the music has to have time, and so I see it very much in the same way, the same sort of feeling. But yes, I think that I think it's a matter of preservation. I think she can see that this man coming into the community is a cancer. He is poisonous. And that it was just so difficult for Black people anyway at that time. Like, we didn't need one more thing happening. And we don't need you here tearing apart families. And so I think she genuinely, I played it this way, doesn't like him around at all, and that's a real hostile relationship that they have. But I enjoyed running that fish tavern, and one of the things that we would do, it was sort of an inside joke with the different characters on stage, is that people would actually come and leave these pretend orders, right? So they'd say, this is what and before every performance, I try to think of a menu. Okay, what am I going to offer? Because people would come by and say, what are you serving today? Oh, I'm doing a mulligatawny today. What's that? Or I'm going to do some sort of, bacon and scallop. People would leave really elaborate recipes and say, at noon I'd come. So it was a real joke. It was an inside joke. And so I started saying, gee, I should really make some of these. And so I actually made them, but then Ray said, look, Denise, because it was a fish tavern, he said, fish is too scary. Too many people could have an allergic reaction. You cannot bring that on the stage. You've got to bring something that, that's pretty universal. So every night I would actually make something or bake something every single night that everybody ate in the last scene. And it was a real joy for me. And so that turned into this whole thing, which led to the project that I created during COVID, which was Cooking with Denise. But that was really coming out of that, because at the start of the second act, before the fishermen would go out, all we were talking about is, what did you make last night? Oh, I made this. Like, oh, that sounds fantastic. How did you do that? And then Reggie Smith, we talked every night. That was what was, when the curtain was going up and when we were chatting in the scene, that's what we're chatting about. And so then he would make something for me and bring it to the theater, and I'd make something for him and bring it to the theater. And that turned into a whole, that everybody got involved with. The stagehands got involved with it, management got it. What'd you make? People come to my dressing room before you take it out there. What did you make? I want to have some of that. And it just became so much fun. And the kids would say, what'd you make tonight? Oh, you made lemon bars. Oh my goodness. It was a lot of fun. So my husband could always tell, he'd come home and say, oh, you've got a performance tonight, because the house smells so good. My neighbors would say, what are you making tonight? So it turned into a real event, and it was such a pleasure to do it. So I wanted to do it with the fish, but he was absolutely right that was not something that we could do. And so I actually love everything. I mean, I used to not like rutabagas, but I got stuck once in Reykjavik during a shopero. It was some sort of
strike.
We got
the Icelandic people went on strike.
They went on strike, and
wow.
All we were stuck there was cod and rutabagas. Oh my God, I ate that so much. And so now I like rutabagas. I didn't used to like them, but I really love everything. But I really, really love fish, and I prefer fish. So I love going to the fishmonger. I love, and we fish. I actually live on a farm outside of Baltimore, and we have a pond that we have stocked with all kinds of fish. And I'm married to a real outdoorsman, and my whole family loves camping, and everybody loves fishing, and they hunt and they do all that stuff. So it's all the way live over here. I mean, one Christmas, my husband brought the goose in the house, like the whole goose, and will come in bringing all kinds of beasts. I mean, you got to
Sounds
be.
like Hunding and Sieglinda. So a few things I have to answer you. Barbara Conrad said definitely, not only did Mariah had a man, she has a man, and she keeps him on the side, and he keeps her happy, which is why her eye doesn't wander. Pearl Bailey said to me, and I'm quoting her because it's older speech, honey, she be done with men, was the way she put
Oh,
it. In other words,
yes.
men, that's it. They're in the past for her. Um, now, another thing is, I'm very thorough in my approach to studying everything. And although I've traveled in most of my country and many foreign countries, I had never been to South Carolina. So about 5 months before you opened with Porgy and Bess, I took myself to South Carolina and traveled around, not as a tourist, but really to just talk to people and to eat local food. And an expression that I live near Harlem, and an expression that I heard growing up with my Black friends was, honey, come over to my house. My mama's going to bang some pots. In other words, do a lot of cooking. And in South Carolina, everyone said, we're banging pots tonight. Come on in. And they're incredibly hospitable. And I went into one little town and went in, it was a mostly Black town, and asked what food is good here. And they said, we're picking field peas. You want to go out and pick field peas? And I said, sure. So I went out and they taught me how to pick the peas and gather them and handle them. And so they were wonderful. And they said they'd never seen a white person pick field peas before, and that they enjoyed seeing that. But then they taught me how to cook it. The hospitality was phenomenal. But one thing I'll never forget was one of the women was proud of her pork chops and how she prepared them. And she said, how many do you want? I said, well, I don't know. How many would you serve me? How big are they? And she said, and I love this, she said, it's as big as a raven's wing. And I thought, well, I don't know how big a raven's wing is, but how poetical, how beautifully descriptive. So when I came back to New York and started, I was teaching people Porgy and Bess in preparation for the opening. I
Oh,
used that expression
oh, that's
about the pork chop being as the size of a raven's wing to talk about the imagination, because in the opera, there are birds who are threatening birds, frankly. And I've never heard a piece of food that was not, a chicken wing described as a wing before. And for a pork chop to be described that way, everything I found was so poetical, and the libretto uh, meant so much more to me, because I know that a lot of it is antiquated speech and speech that many people don't use now, or if they do, it's in a context. But I came to understand the rhythms of the speech and the language and how it wound up in the music. And frankly, that's why I went, was to immerse myself in the century later, almost century later, culture of South Carolina away from the tourist towns, just in the inland. I'm a very friendly person, so I'd wander in and talk to people, and they were incredibly friendly. And it was very meaningful for me. And I try to, when I am studying an opera, teaching an opera, I try to go to the place where it's from if it's something unusual. Obviously, I don't have to go to Paris for La Boheme, but I might go to rural Sicily for Cavalleria Rusticana, for example.
wow.
And I've done that. I've done that quite a bit.
Wow.
Because when I teach Cavalleria Rusticana and I teach Porgy and Bess, I find a lot of similarities in terms of there being very local speech, in terms of its being an enclosed town with a social strata and backstories and poverty and so on. And because many Italians look at Cavalleria Rusticana and they see it as sort of a backward, we're not that way anymore kind of approach. But it still is part of the DNA of Italian culture, the way Porgy and Bess, out of the past, is part of the DNA of contemporary culture and feeds the way we talk about current society and relations and prejudices and stereotypes and so on. And I think they're important to study without embracing every value system that they have. That opera, the characters, many of them do have wonderful value systems.
Absolutely.
And that's what I teach when I teach it. So I want to ask you many, many more questions. I believe you went to the Duke Ellington School of the Performing Arts in Washington. And in my household growing up, my dad was a musician. We had a few patron saints, and one of them was Duke Ellington. And I was raised on Duke Ellington, really just everything. And I've never spoken to anyone who actually went to the Duke Ellington School of the Performing Arts, which I believe is a high school. Is that correct? Talk about that, please.
That's wonderful. So that's in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown. It's a magnificent place. And they've just had a huge renovation that took a couple years, and it is a palace. I mean, it is a real jewel now to the city. But when I was there, it was the old Western High School. It's in a beautiful, beautiful location, and a performing arts high school where you can, do, singing, dance, theater, visual arts, they have now an audio visual department and all of that. Magnificent place, just magnificent. I was this kid growing up in Washington, D.C., who was incredible. I was an incredibly shy and awkward kid. And not, I sort of stayed to myself and wasn't really accepted, quite honestly, in the community. And someone told me, a music teacher told me about the Duke Ellington School, and she said, Denise, you should go audition there. And from the second I was there, I felt this way when I was at Oberlin College as well. But from the second I was there, when I walked through the door, I knew that I found my people. I knew that I found my tribe, I felt like I could breathe for the first time. And it was just a place of all these wonderful artists. And it was really a place of all the weird kids, all the kids who were ostracized, and all the kids that were different, and all the kids that were, artistic and off the beaten path. And I really felt like, for me, it was a real haven, So it was a, wonderful place. It was there that I know you and I spoke the other day about inspiration, about some of the people that inspired me. And it was there that I heard opera. And incidentally, you spoke of Cavalleria Rusticana. Cavalleria Rusticana, my voice teacher had given me a recording of Cavalleria Rusticana, and I just fell completely in love. And I played that incessantly around the house. And my brother and sister would say, give us a break with this praise music, like, when can we, not hear that playing around the house? But I fell in love, and just over and over and over and over again. And for me, it was a place of a real sort of explosion into all kinds of the arts, because I grew up in a very, very strict household. My father's a minister. My mother was very, very, very strict. And, there was only gospel music in the house. Everything else was the devil's music, right? And it was there that I heard other kinds of music for the first time. So for me, everything was a discovery. It was like, what is that? What is that? And, when I heard opera, I was like, what in the world is that called? For me, it was instantaneous. It's like, I don't know what this is, but I just, I would stay in the listening library all day long, to over and over and over and over and over again, and really, really fell in love. So for me, it was really a place, it was magical, where I could be with my group of people that it felt like, where every day we were learning so much and discovering so much, and I was in love with more and more. I learned about, French melody and German lieder and, American art, English art songs, all this stuff, opera, arias, oratorio.
In high school, that's a wonderful thing. I know.
100%. And it's a wonderful place where they have spectacular teachers who, love the students, and everybody goes far, beyond anything that is expected in nurturing and sharing with I'm still in touch to this day with all of my teachers, the ones that are still here. I'm still in touch with all of them. And, you know, if I'm ever performing in the Washington, they're the ones that are on the front row and just magnificent human beings who invested and poured everything that they had inside of all of the kids. So it was a really phenomenal place to be, where I found everybody who felt so passionate about whatever their discipline was, contagious, you know, because when people had a lunch break, people were doing people would be outside playing. You could see the dancers dancing and stretching and doing things, and theater kids, you know, reciting some monologue or working on something. You know, I used to get to the school at 6 a.m. and you couldn't find a practice room. That was high school. I'd get there at 6 a.m. You couldn't find a practice room because everybody was there. So it was this place where there was this incredible infectious energy of everybody discovering and wanting to set out and make a name for themselves and want to, you know, change the world. And so it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. And so I go back there often when I can to work with the kids and do master classes. And I just believe so much in the work they're doing. It's always been incredibly difficult for them to keep the doors open. It's so hard still every year. They have to fight so much and do so much fundraising and to try to get, you know, the people in Washington to value this, you know, that to value the arts. Because
I'm going to make a comment that you don't have to reply to if you don't want to, but if you do, you can. I'm a New Yorker. I spend a great deal of time in Washington. I love your city. I have worked there a lot. I've taught at the Smithsonian for more than 20 years. I've done a lot of work at the Kennedy Center. I've attended many wonderful performances. A very dear friend of mine is the head of the National Symphony. So I'm really connected to Washington, its art galleries and everything. I found, and I'll give you the specific example, I went to Washington for Morella Frainie's last opera performance. It was Tchaikovsky's Joan of Arc. I forget, it's called The Maid of Orleans, I think. And why Morella Frainie retired from Washington, from opera in Washington and not Milan or New York, I don't know, but she did. And she was wonderful. And I find that Washington audiences are more polite than enthusiastic, and that they're having witnessed the opera farewell of Morella Frainie, and they applauded, but it was just not commensurate with that. And I've often found when I'm at the Kennedy Center that people are not necessarily as expressive and demonstrative in their recognition, no matter how fabulous their performance. It doesn't have to do with the performance. I don't know whether it's a large diplomatic community. I don't know what the reason is. I don't know if you have any ideas on that, or you want to just say next, please.
Well, I've not thought about it in that way. You know, I'm from Washington, so whenever I perform, my family and my friends are there, and there's always a terrific amount of enthusiasm from that standpoint. And, you know, I think I've sort of worn the banner of the hometown girl, you know, does well. So I've always felt a very warm reception from the audiences. But it's true that it is a very, very different personality from that of New York City or Italy, for example, in some places, because I found the Italians to be completely different from the French and completely different from the Germans, you know.
In what way?
Well, I think they're hotter. I mean, I think the Italians are much more like, if they love you, you know. But though, you know, I'll have to say that, you know, whenever I've sung in Germany and in Austria, the fans there are not like anybody else. They show up at the rehearsals to greet you before and after the rehearsals. And they've got photographs from 20 years ago when you did something, and, you know, and they want you to sign this, and they still write to this day. They still write and ask for a photograph or a publicity photo or something like that. So I found them to be, the German speaking, to be incredibly devoted, like hardcore devoted. If they love you, they love you. But I found that the Italians have an exuberance in the theater. That can go many different ways, right? I was singing, I was singing Mahler's Kindertotenlieder in Genova, and I wore this beautiful Ferretti gown, gorgeous. I mean, gorgeous. The top was crushed velvet, and the bottom part was like scarves in chiffon, beautiful. I came out on the stage. I was going to do the Kindertotenlieder, and the people started booing like crazy. Va riposa la casa, va. And I turned to the conductor, Daniel Oren, and I said, okay, I haven't even sung a note yet. What is the problem? He said, you're wearing purple.
Mm-hmm.
It's a curse in the theater. I said, what?
Yep.
I said, you got to be kidding me. This is a great dress. You know how much I paid for this dress? It's not that. I said, Denise, doesn't matter. This is a purple dress. That's considered a curse, and it's considered for Pasqua. It's also sacred. It also means no work. This is what he told me. The explanation that he gave me is that during this time, it was reserved for the clergy, and it meant that this was during the time of
Lent.
Lent, which we started yesterday, and that this means no work. He said, "Do you have a coat?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go back to your dressing room, put on your coat." So I went out to put into my dressing, put on a coat, came back, and I came back on the coat. Yay! We did a concert. So I mean that to say that they're incredibly, emotional. That's been my experience. Also with the claque, which was a thing there. I did not even know that was a thing.
Just to explain to listeners, the claque, I'll put it in the past tense, were people who would be paid by singer A to applaud singer A and boo singer B.
I thought it was a thing of the past. I had no idea. I thought it was something that existed in Caruso's time. There's so many people in the theater, and there was a man outside of my dressing room all the time. I said, buonasera, buonasera, signora, buonasera. I see him when I come in, and finally I asked somebody, I said, who is that man? Who's it? He's the capo, they told me, of the club. And I said, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. Like they said, and if you don't pay him, and I said, that's extortion. I'm not going to do that. They said, no, wait a minute. You might want to rethink this. Okay. First of all, if you don't pay him, the theater will take it out of your payment. Number one. Number two, you want to pay them because they will make your debut a catastrophe. And they said to me, are you happy? We're so happy to welcome you here in Italy. We want to make sure that you have a wonderful, successful opening. It started to become clear what they were talking about. And I said, oh, right, okay. I called my agent and I said, look, he said, Denise, you're gonna have to pay them. You have to pay them. And so we did. And if you did, and you could, and then I could tell if one of my colleagues paid them more, right? Because then they go crazy and I'd say, oh, I didn't pay them enough, And so, but that was really, really something. So I found the Italians to be a real emotion. For example, I did this one piece by Honegger, Antigone, in Palermo one time. New music, unusual piece, not everybody's cup of tea. And really, before the curtain calls, the bows at the end, all you could see were the backs of people racing, to the parking lot, running, like crazy, like lightning out of the theater, because it was just too, foreign and too wild and too crazy and not something. So I found it, the Italians to be incredibly demonstrative, but the Germans incredibly dedicated and devoted and
prepared.
Yeah. And, for example, in Asia, when I would sing there, I'd see scores that people would bring the scores to the theater and they'd follow along with you and they'd tell you if you made a mistake, if you sang an eighth note instead of a quarter note or whatever it was. But I did a tour of the Death of Cleopatra in
Berlioz.
Yeah. And so many, like you expect to see people's faces. I saw the back of the scores of people following along. So very, very, very different audiences. But to finally answer the question, I do find it a bit different. I do find a very different personality in New York City from Washington, D.C. But if I start thinking about all over the United States, it depends. It depends on the piece for me. Depends. I did, for example, I did Werther with Andrea Bocelli in Michigan.
Detroit.
That was like that was like a rock concert. Of course, it was because of him, and he rode out on a white horse. Okay, this is how the opera started. And that group there that was there, you could tell they were not the opera crowd. I mean, they were not the opera.
Right.
They were not really the Conoscenti. And that audience was outrageous. And I was like, oh gosh, why couldn't I have an audience like this, like everywhere? They applauded for everything. They were on their feet for everything. You know, it was really, really different.
I don't think Charlotte gets a white horse, though. That's the thing.
She doesn't get it.
You need to do more horse operas.
Carmen,
of course.
Carmen,
Well, I'm just going to say this in passing because Denise Graves is the Carmen of our time and sang it many, many times at the Met. I have loved you in it many, many times. I'm just putting that out there because I decide a lot of people talk to you about Carmen all the time. And I wanted to talk to you about things that maybe people don't ask Denise Graves about so much. But on the list of recordings and artists who inspired Denise, I added an album of her French opera arias. And we're going to get to those in a couple of minutes. There are just a couple more. There are many things I would ask you, and I want to watch our time. One of my favorite operas, one of the operas I travel to see, is Andrea Chenier by Umberto Giordano. And so I arranged to be in London for work when it was being done there a few years ago. And Jonas Kaufmann was singing, and I had seen him do it before, so I knew he was good. And I didn't look at the program. I just knew it was Jonas Kaufmann and Eva Maria Westbrook, and I really didn't even look at the rest of the program. And then, and I was jet lagged, but out came this wonderful Bercy, and I privately said to myself, who is that? This is the best Bercy I've ever seen. And then I took out the binoculars. It's Denise Graves. And I mean, for one thing, you were talking before about Mariah being not the lead, so to speak. You were so good in that role. You made her so complete. She is the compassionate, caring, sacrificing friend to Maddalena. And that role usually is played as nothing. And you gave her so much texture that I woke up, of course, needless to say. And so, you know, I believe that great artists play all kinds of roles and they do them really well. And I have seen, for example, Carita Mattila play smaller roles and be magnificent.
I saw her do the old prioress in what is my favorite opera, Dialogue of
Carmelites. Yeah.
And she was spectacular.
She was. So, so therefore, tell me how Bercy came about, and because it's not, you know, it's usually offered not to stars, so to speak. And you're a star, and you play Carmen and Dalila and all that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. That's real sweet. Thank you, and felt and appreciated. I'd sung at Covent Garden a lot in the early part of my career, and I hadn't been there for a long while. And I was represented by, I am represented by IMG and also IMG in London. And they kept saying, we want to have you back at Covent Garden, but gosh, we just don't know what. There's nothing, like, we look through the seasons, there's really nothing for you. And then this offer came, and I said, well, because I didn't know, and I said, well, let me take a look at it. And she has an aria. And I said, you know, I like it. I think and it was a fantastic cast.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I had been there previously for, I didn't realize I had my phone on. I'm sorry. I don't have my phone on. It's on Do Not Disturb. Anyway. And so I took a look at it. I listened to it. I knew who the cast was going to be. And it was a free time in the calendar. And first of all, I love London. I lived in Paris for a long while, and I love London, and I love singing at Covent Garden. And it was just, and I said, let me sing through it. Let me sing through it first before I have a look. Let me look at some of the difficult parts and look at the aria and see if it's going to work or not. And I will say this, Fred, I will say that there's a tiny piece. I mean, I think, first of all, as a mezzo-soprano, there aren't that many leading lady roles from my voice type. Not, there are more than we see come around. You talked about playing the French heroines, and so there's some pieces like, Sappho or Mignon, that we see where the mezzo is the title, but there's not a lot. And so I think that as a mezzo-soprano, you're kind of conditioned, I don't know, it depends, that you might not be the prima donna, right? And so that wasn't, and I really come from the school of thought that really that there are no small parts, and that everything about it was good, and that I was happy to stretch myself differently. My biggest issue with it was sort of being seen in a subservient role as a Black person. That was my larger issue with it, not so much the role. I wanted, because she is a part of the family. She is a part of the family, but I did want to play with her. Well, I am always concerned, and I was concerned about that even with Mariah, to be quite honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't want to play her as like some ways that I've seen it before, or some ways that it could be conceived. Because Mariah is, it's in pieces. It's very fragmented. You don't get a moment. I mean, there's the trio. That's really it. I mean, you sing here, you sing there, and she's woven throughout, but there's not a real moment that you have. So from the standpoint of a singer, it's frustrating in that way when you want to just be able to sing. With Bercy, I had the opportunity to sing an aria and stuff like that, but that was not problematic for me. The bigger, I've had to be used to get, and certainly more and more, get used to the idea that, the mezzo-soprano isn't always playing she's supporting a lot of times. A lot of times she's supporting. And so I'm fine with that. It's what my voice does. There is the diva part of me that wants to, like when we're doing Porgy and Bess, I just thought, gosh, I couldn't even made her a mezzo. That would have been great. And there is that part of the singer part of you that wants to do more and wants to have more time out there and wants to have the opportunity to sing your voice. But in the case of Bercy, in the case of Mariah, and particularly in the case of Mariah, I was really happy and pleased to be a part of it. I was really happy to be a part of it. It was a lot of fun with all those people up there, 60 people making the Met debuts at once, and now it's nominated for a Grammy. I mean, yeah. This was fantastic for all these people. And I had 3 of my own students in it. So for me, it was a beautiful thing. Every time I would look on the stage or interact with them, I thought, wow, look at this, look at what we're doing here. This piece that's been away for, 30 something years or whatever from the Met. So singing Bercy was a real pleasure. I'd not worked with Jonas, and I'd heard and loved and admired him so much. And I think it was Tony Pappano. I love work. Tony and I worked together at Wolf Trap years ago. I sang Marcellina in Nozze back in the day with Dawn Upshaw singing Susanna. But that was back in the 80s with Vyacheslav Schutte. He wasn't the conductor on that, but he was conducting Love for Three Oranges.
I was about to ask you about him. Would you tell us about him? You call him Gigi as well, because I think many people, myself included, didn't know him. Who was he?
Right. So he was a magnificent conductor. but he was also for me a very a personal friend. I met him at Wolf Trap, oh gosh, 87, 87, 88, something like that. I met him at Wolf Trap, and we did an evening of arias with all of the, the Wolf Trap artists. And he said, oh my gosh, he was immediately a supporter, and he was asking, he told his manager right away, there's a mezzo here that I really want you to hear. And that's really how I got my management too, was him, by the way. And so, and then we became really good friends, and I left there to go to Houston. I was working with Houston Grand Opera, and I heard about a position being open for a music director. And I called him, I said, I am hearing on the ground that they are going to be looking for a new music director. I think you should come here. And so we helped each other a lot throughout our career. So he came to Houston, they fell in love with him, and they offered him the position. And then he was doing a Carmen in San Francisco. Marilyn Horne was supposed to be singing it. She had to have a knee operation. Then they got Kathleen Kuhlman. I don't know if you remember that name at all.
Sure.
Then she got sick. Gigi was conducting, and he said, "You got to get Denise Graves. You got to get Denise Graves." And so I came out there to do this Carmen. I broke my leg, but I said, "Look, I'm doing it." It was so much fun. And so throughout our career, we were always recommending each other for something. And we were doing a concert, and then he got ill. He had leukemia. He was very, very good friends with Jose Carreras. And Carreras and I worked together at the Arena di Verona in Carmen. And he and Jose had done lots of concerts together. And he was really, really good friends with Leonucci and Jose Carreras. And but he was Croatian.
Croatian, yeah.
Yeah. And so he invited me to Zagreb and to Pula and to Dubrovnik for where he was running festivals. So I did lots of work over there because of him. But then we planned this concert together in Zagreb, and I went over for the concert. And when I got there, he died. And so instead of just singing the concert, I sang for his funeral.
Huh.
That was quite something, and that was quite the event. But he was a very, 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 very dear friend.
There's someone else I'd like to ask you about who, not that we're going on this tangent of people who've died, but someone who's a friend of mine who died of COVID about 2 months ago, not even, Elijah Moshinsky, who directed 2 productions that you were starring in at the Met, one of them specifically, Samson Delilah, and you were also in Louisa Miller, and Elijah was a great Verdian, and I think that Verdi gets too many bad productions because people don't know how to present him. The Samson Delilah, and I'm not saying this euphemistically, was very vivid. It was very out there, but in a very good way. And one thing I always loved about his work is that he really studied the characters and the music and didn't impose his own conception, but his imagination was so great, in my view, that we, on a great percentage of the time, wound up with great productions. Would you talk about Elijah Moshinsky? And
well, I loved him. He was incredibly generous to me. That production, I loved it. Was Julie Taymor working with that? I know that it was a while ago also, but some of the designs I had the feeling were coming from some people who were working with the Lion King or something like that. As I tried
there were all the hands on everything.
In Act 2, yes,
Act 2.
Everywhere, and
the hands became a symbol.
Yes, and the Bacchanal in Act 3, that scene was one of my most favorite moments in the opera. But he was incredibly kind and gave me a lot of range, really let me sort of find her. I've not had an experience with her for sure, but every time I arrive on an engagement, I try to arrive empty and to help, give the director's vision. So there was a tremendous amount of generosity with Elijah. He gave me space and I gave him space. And I said, I'm very, very open to discovering and learning more about her and about telling the story differently. So there was a lot of grace there on his part. As I remember, there were lots of chuckles. And thank you for reminding me of that, because I'd forgotten. Everybody texted me when he passed. Everybody said, "Did you know that Elijah?" And I was so deeply sorry to have heard that. But it was a beautiful experience. I have wonderful memories of us working together on that, and working in great detail with the arias and with the text too. Um, um, gee, I wonder if I could say this, but I would say that, it was Leonard Slatkin, I think.
Conducting, yes.
Yeah, it was Leonard Slatkin that conducted. And so I would say that I learned a lot about the relationship with Samson and Delilah under Elijah. There were lots of discussions also. We would sometimes have rehearsals where we would just talk about what's going on here. And he and I remember sitting down and going through the score and just talking about it. What do you think is going on here? How do you see this? How do you? So there was a lot of respect. I would say that sometimes when you go, when you're on an engagement, different strokes for different folks, but some directors have their own ideas of what they believe, and they want you to get that vision, and I believe that that's our job too. But with Elijah, there was much more generosity in that there was much more of an exchange and a back and forth and discussions about what we thought. And sometimes he didn't agree with me, sometimes I didn't agree with him, and we'd find a way that how can we both be served in that. And so that's not something I think that you often see from directors.
I agree. But
Right.
that's part of his greatness. He had agreed to join me next month on this program, but sadly he died very quickly when he got it. And so I wrote to him on his birthday, and he died a few days after his birthday. And he always answered my birthday messages, but he didn't this year. And that to me was a sign. And then not 5 days later, he died in January. So I'm turning the direction again. I know that you are very involved with the Juilliard School and the vocal arts program there. It's a school that I love and have been involved with. I created a scholarship there many years ago, my dad's memory, my dad being a trombonist. And my dad was in the Navy in World War II, and he left me his Navy pension, and I gave it to Juilliard. So
Wow.
I've been loving and caring about Juilliard and finding it very special forever, and teach there occasionally. But I know that you are now part of the faculty of the vocal arts program. Tell me about that.
I am
Brian
delighted.
Ziegler runs it.
That's right. I am delighted to be there. And Brian, Brian and I worked together for years, because I've done, I probably did more recitals than I did opera. And Brian and I collaborated so much on so many recitals. But I love voices. I love young people. I really want to try to make the path for them easier, if that's possible. Although I believe that a certain amount of struggle is necessary, and that it should be there. I mean, I think you have to be hungry, and I think that you have to want it also. But I just know what my experience was like, and I am eager to share what it is that I know about the voice, what it is I know about performing with the young people when they come through the door with those young faces that are so young and so bright, and the eyes are so big. I fall on my knees just looking at them, at each person who wants to make a difference and wants to change the world. But I'm really in service of that seed that says, gee, I would really love to sing, and to further that, by going into higher education. I really want to serve that, and I want to nurture and care for them. And so for me, it's I fall in love very easily. And I've fallen in love with all of the students there, even before I met them, but I have worked with them in person. I have been there in person, even during COVID. But we started in the spring online, and just getting to know everybody. They're so interesting, and their own stories. And what everybody wants to do. And there's this one girl there who's so fantastic, and we sing like the same repertoire, and she wants to do everything. And for me, it's a great pleasure to, I said, we can go from cover to cover to go through that with somebody, because there is no, you can do that with a director and get a very different type of insight. There's nothing like doing it with another singer who says, uh-oh, right here, here's what I need to tell you. You need to watch out for that. You got to make sure you get your breath really low, because they're going to have you running around at this point. And, you know, all those different sort of things that you can share with singers. And so, and also the truth of the matter is, Fred, is that I become a better singer and a better artist, and certainly a better human being by working with them. When you have to articulate what it is that you want to do, and each person is so different, I find that fascinating, that each person learns differently, each person has a different set of skills, and you have to try to find out what it is with this particular person, what is the key that unlocks their understanding. I find all of that really, really, really fascinating, but I have a strong desire to nurture and to take care of them. And, you know, certainly Juilliard is like the Harvard of all the schools. And so for me, it's a real honor to be there. It's a joy to be collaborating and working again with Brian, but working with these young artists is a real, real, real joy, and discovering more about myself and discovering new music all the time, and working with different voice types. You know, at Peabody, I have a studio of all, you know, women. And I love men, particularly baritones. I love working with baritones, but
What's particular about baritones?
I think we're talking, well, first of all, I'm probably a baritone myself, but it's this, I find it the same as the mezzo-soprano voice, and I understand exactly where they need to cover as you go through the bottleneck, as you go through the passaggio. I mean, the tenor voice is something really, really, really unusual, I think. But I understand, and I'm good with baritones, and I like working with them also too. But I get in my studios and my private studio, I get a lot of mezzos, as you might imagine, because, and I love that too. But working with all kinds of voice types, all kinds of singers there, it's a real, it's refreshing. It keeps you young, it keeps you learning. And so, and being there at this great institution for me is it's an honor.
There's something very particular about Juilliard that, as you said, it's the Harvard of the schools, but sometimes Harvard is not necessarily the best on a certain subject. But Dr. Joseph Polizzi, the previous president, I knew him very well and admired him greatly, and he gave me a cap. Juilliard athletics, never lost since 1905. That's because Juilliard does not have a sports program.
Right.
But he created a curriculum there about the artist as citizen. And very specifically, he infused through all the disciplines of theater and dance and composition and instrumental and vocal that the artist is a citizen, and she or he has a responsibility in society, in addition to a responsibility to the playwrights and choreographers and conductors and composers that they serve that way. And you feel that at Juilliard, and that's one of the things that I most love about. Now, I know you're on a schedule. I want to ask you about two more.
Yes. To your point, I will say this, that the kids that I've worked with, I call them kids, they're young adults, there is not a sense of entitlement. They are serious, they are generous, they are very, very open. They want to receive whatever it is that, you know, they're not saying, this I find to be very, very refreshing from this group of young artists, that they are incredibly open and incredibly appreciative. You know, they're kind and respectful, and I've enjoyed every moment of being there.
So two more artists I want to ask you about. You provide a wonderful list of artists who inspire you, and Leontine Price is there, and I got to work with her a lot, and it was a great honor to use the word honor that you use. That's the word she uses, is an honor. Maybe sometime you and I can just do a public conversation somewhere about her and her meaning. But the two artists I want to ask you about are Zubin Mehta Tell me, you said this is the
Uh,
conductor. Can you tell me why?
well, I think first of all, he's a real singer's conductor. And by that, I mean, I feel that he has a sixth sense. He knows, I've done a lot of concerts with him. We've done a lot of Motto. We did Carmen together too in Firenze also. We did some Messiahs. We did Mahler Second. We did lots of things together. But what I found about him, first of all, I'm in love with his left hand. That's number one, because I feel like he holds the music. I feel like he, I feel that he embodies the music. I feel like the music is coming out of him. And I feel like he controls and holds that in his left hand. The way his gestures and the way the different postures that he shows with his left hand, I feel him cradling the music and I feel him caressing it. Oh, he's singing all the time. You can sort of see him do that. He's a real singer's conductor for me. If you're doing well, and he knows when that is, then he will let you hold on to those top notes forever. And he celebrates that with you. You know, he's not like, okay, we got to get off and get, if you're doing great, if you're in voice, he's loving it with you. It's almost as if he's singing with you. And that's what I love about him. What I love about him is that I feel that he is the music. I feel like he's experiencing, like the music is pouring out of him. And if you're doing well, he's doing well. And conversely, if you're not in your best form, he knows how to get the hell out of Dodge and get you out of there if you're in the weeds, I find him to be very kind that way. And I think that he really likes singers, and I think that he really likes singing, because I always loved going to rehearsals with him too, because he would get so excited about it. And when we did Carmen together, he was the music director there at the Maggio
Musicale for many years.
He came to he could have sent, like so many did, a Mitarbeiter or somebody like that. He was at every single staging rehearsal. Now, most of the time, the big conductors will come in, when it's no. He was in there. Nuria Esper. Oh my God, I just remember her name, Nuria Esper. We were working together on Carmen. He was there for no. She can't do that move because here I need her to hold this and do that, and she's got to see me. He was absolutely a part of everything that happened, and fighting also for the singer. So this is again one of the reasons that I love him, because I believe, first of all, that he loves music and that he loves singers and that he's having so much fun when he's doing it. And for me, he's just erste Klasse.
I have heard him a lot for decades in Florence and in Munich, which were his two bases in Europe for a very long time. When I was a teenager in New York, I heard him occasionally at the Met and often at the New York Philharmonic. And it's always been a mystery to me why he has not conducted more at the Met. And I am a columnist for WQXR Radio here in New York, not a critic. But usually once a year or so, I'll do an article about the things I would like to see that I've not seen. And at the very top of the list was Zubin Mehta conducting at the Met. And I think it's our loss here in New York that we have not had him more conducting opera. The other person I want to ask you about, I've met many people who have met Marion Anderson, but I never thought to ask about Marion Anderson, one of the greatest singers of all time, period. We don't have to define that more. Famous for her 1939 performance in Washington at the Lincoln Memorial, but famous, frankly, for decades of superb artistry, of devotion to work, of devotion to young artists. And because you are, in addition to being a great artist, a very fine and devoted, loving teacher, I can tell the loving part. What did she pass down to you spiritually, creatively, that you carry today?
Let the music speak. Let the music speak. That first of all, if you're prepared and you've done your work, in spite of everything, this is still a great country. I know It's still a great country. That in this country, if you are prepared and have done your work, that the American dream, which I see amongst some of my kids and some millennials feel like is lost, that in this country you can become whatever it is that you imagine. But the other thing that I would say about her is that let the music speak for you. Because, you know, she was a quiet and very sort of quietly dignified woman. Of course, she came along in a period of time that was very, very different. But I felt that she, and I feel the same way about Ellington too, told their story in their sound. I feel like all of the information that you needed to know about them is in the DNA of their sound. The sound told the story, told their story, their personal story. And that's what I always hear in her voice. And that's one of the things I think that if there's something that I got from her, many, many, many things from this tremendous artist, but that you do your work and you make it impossible for them to say no. You just do everything. If you're concentrated and focused on what you need to do, you've got enough work to do. You've got enough work to do by just focusing on yourself. And if there's anything that you want to express, or if there's anything that you feel like you can't say, put that in your voice. Put that in your sound, and it will translate. It will reach and it will touch hearts, and the music has the power to do that. You don't have to say anything. Just be a vessel. Just be a faucet that the water comes out of. Just let the music do its work. Yeah.
Denise, sometime, because I know you have to go, when we're all out from lockdown, I want to sit with you in front of a class, in front of an audience, and continue many of the things we're discussing. But one thing I'd like to do is go back to the concert that Marion Anderson did in 1939 and look at the entire program. Because when you talk about let the music speak for you, I think what's been forgotten about that program is that musically it was extraordinary, and that it was diverse and inclusive and expressive. And we somehow focus, understandably, on her having sung My Country 'Tis of Thee, and for all the right reasons, but the whole program was extraordinary.
The whole program was extraordinary. And some years ago, you can find this on the Washington Post because it was on the front page. We did a reenactment of that concert, and I sang everything that she sang.
Wow.
And it was high. She had a very long voice.
Yeah.
She had a range too, an incredible range. And yeah, and Schubert, I mean, all kinds of arias and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be continued, we're going to bang some pots one day. And
that's right.
This has been a real pleasure. You have given all of us so much, myself included, and I'm very grateful. You're an artist that I've followed and loved for a very long time. And I'm very glad that while your Carmen is fantastic, that we were able to talk about many more things today than Carmen. There's a lot more we could have discussed, and one day we will. But in the meantime, keep up the good work. You're doing a fantastic things. Thank you.
You have to write a book. Are you going to do that?
I've written 9 books, but
because you've spoken to so many artists.
That may happen. 6 of my books are cookbooks, but 2 of them are about music. Yes, my dear, we didn't go there. Yeah.
Oh my God, we so have to talk.
There are many people who know the food Fred Plotkin who have no concept that I know anything about opera. I'm well known in the food world and they don't know the opera side. And then there are the opera people who don't know the food side. Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah. So,
so calling you.
okay. And I want the recipe for the lemon bars.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. I was so glad to share this time with you, and I appreciate your sharing it with us. See
It
you
was
again.
a gift to me. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.